Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a little show that tries to pack a punch. We like to say we fight beyond our weight and out of our weight class once in a while, but we always have a lot of fun on this program. I'm Robin Adair, and with me, as always, from his Saanich lair, is the Croatian sensation, the artist also known as John Jurisic. And John, so much going on right now, so many things to talk about. What's sort of at the top of your list as we get into this show?
I could list a dozen things, Robin. It's extraordinary. News every 15 minutes. You and I should do 10, 20 shows a day. Not. First thing that really grabbed my attention, Robin, was the big anti-growth logging rally, which marched onto the Victoria legislature. These folks are gearing up for apparently another year of protest to protect trees. And guess what? This time they had some help, big time help. Neil Young, the famous singer, the global artist, and his wife, Daryl Hannah, showed up to lend their support with a song.
It has to do with Canada. It has to do with the ages. If we're lucky enough to have ages. And these trees have lasted so long, they deserve Canada's respect.
Neil Young, always outspoken. He's been very, very vocal about old growth, but also about oil and gas in Canada, and cuts both ways. But for the guy who wrote Ohio all those years ago, he's been true to his word about staying active in social causes that he thinks are important. Another very high-profile environmentalist also spoke to the crowd. That was Dr. David Suzuki, and he talked about society building inventory and getting an assessment of our natural resources, and also getting an idea about what sustainable resource management can look like. And I think that's very reasonable. I mean, let's all think about how we can go forward. We can't just throw out all of our natural resource as an industry. We depend on a lot of these industries and sustainable jobs, but we have to do it in a reasonable fashion. And I really hope that the old growth protesters are going to take that to heart and move forward and call for that, and maybe a little less blocking of highways and bridges in the future. But let's now shift over. It's Harris Green and approval for that project, which has now gone a little bit sideways because of parking. John, what did you think?
Robin, it does feel like a comedy act. It certainly qualifies for a South Park cartoon, but this is very serious stuff. We've been debating how the lack of affordable housing is seriously impacting our society. It's outrageous that Victoria Councillor Caradona, at the last moment, without anyone being able to provide input, calls for a further reduction in parking for the largest housing development proposal in Victoria's long history. This new council completely blindsided Starland, the developer. Whether you hate developers or development, it turns out in our municipal government, they're allowed to speak to what councillors say and decide what they. So these council, they voted there should only be enough parking for one out of every 8 residents, Robin. So how do they expect to move 1,500 rental units? How do they expect to sell those with no parking? Oh, my head's starting to feel like it's going to explode. Buses, bikes, walking. Don't cut it. Come on, please. Mayor Alto says parking is still negotiable. But don't be shocked if the developer walks. What kind of precedent is this? In any kind of business, there's sort of, everyone has an equal chance to respond. If it's not to their benefit, well, then okay. They've had no chance. This is a terrible precedent, Robin. We simply can't order everyone to give up their right to drive to please a few radical politicians. Come on.
I might add, John, that we are studying, I think, on a smaller scale and should continue to study on a smaller scale developments that don't have easy car access. And I think you can do that on a smaller scale and then study, okay, what works here, what doesn't work here, what can we learn from doing this? It's a brave new world. And I think they could proceed with that. They jump on this giant project, and I think they've got a bit of a mess on their hands. But now let's swing over, John, to another topic. And it's the hottest international topic, has been for quite some time, really, and that's what's going on in Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden was just in Kyiv recently to, again, show his support, show the support of NATO and the West and the Americans, and they are standing steadfast. Over this past couple of weeks, Republican hardliners like Marjorie Taylor Greene have been yelling from the rooftop that America has no business getting involved in the Ukrainian war, and all money and support heading to Eastern Europe should stop and that war should immediately end. But Joe Biden is steadfast, and I think he really needs to be in the face of Vladimir Putin, who continues to wave his saber, no sign of compromise, and now jumping into the middle of this nasty mix is China.
Oh, man, that really began to add another element of fright and concern to this tragedy going on over there. While Ukraine faces the Russian invaders, the Chinese foreign minister was in Moscow, promising Chinese solidarity. Well, what does that mean? What President Xi and Vladimir Putin signed a cooperation treaty a while ago, and now the Chinese are proposing a peace treaty where Russia gets everything it wants, and Ukraine is denied future EU and NATO membership. That's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I don't think so. The American Foreign Secretary has told the Chinese not to get further involved. Scary stuff. And not to send arms to Russia. Such a friggin' mess, as we've now passed the 1-year anniversary of this conflict starting.
It's a terrible situation, and compounding it, there's terrible situations unrelated but just as serious in that same region. And we've just had that massive earthquake in Syria and Turkey, and I believe over 50,000 people killed, and certainly many more injured. A terrible situation. And our hats are off to the men and women of Canada and other countries who've gone to help pull people out of buildings and save lives. We've also had people from Vancouver Island getting over there and participating. And it's very important that we show that there is charity for people overseas, although there are people who believe that charity should be at home first. And that's an issue, John.
It's interesting that we've had some feedback on the show critical of Canadians going overseas to help in that earthquake-based crisis, saying that there's plenty of problems right here in Canada. I've heard that argument as long as I've been living. This very narrow thinking. We are all human beings, regardless of borders. I believe that putting ourselves out to the rest of the world says a lot about Canadians. It says a lot about us and our moral standing. And that makes me very proud. And the same can be said, likely, about the recent South Island mission to Ukraine.
We're all proud of that. We think it's fantastic that People are going out of their way to show support for Ukraine. And these Vancouver Island volunteers have returned from a second humanitarian mission. And that includes a CTV reporter who's been on both of these trips. That's camera operator and reporter Brendan Strain. And this was the second mission, as I mentioned, where he traveled to the war-torn Eastern European theater. He says he hopes the images he captured and the stories he's brought home remind people in Canada that Ukraine really needs our help.
Also, Robin, traveling to Ukraine was former Langford Fire Chief Bob Beckett. We've had several interviews with him over the years. Bob has traveled to numerous disasters and war sites, including Haiti, for example. He says it's humbling to have so much community support in the form of medical aid, firefighting equipment, and school supplies. What a fantastic, great example Bob has been for all of us in our community.
Absolutely. And also joining that team this time was Nick Detchev. This was his first humanitarian mission in Eastern Europe. And he and his Victoria Hand Project organization, which was started at the University of Victoria, has developed prosthetic arms and limbs that are going to really help a lot of people around the world, but are particularly, in this case, helping Ukrainians who've lost limbs in this war, and they've really put their ingenuity to the test.
UVic has been, such a catalyst of innovation in so many fields. It's a fantastic way to reach out and support Ukraine from a Canadian institution, one of the best universities in Canada. Here you see the Victoria Hand Project right in action, as this gentleman immediately sees the benefits of the technology. Wow. Through Ukrainian partnerships, they were able to fit 5 amputees with hands and provide initial supplies and equipment to allow these new partners to help more people.
It's just amazing, John. And another member of this team who had never been on a humanitarian mission before was Ravi Parmar. He's the chair of the Sauk School District. And as it happens, he's on the Rumble Room. Let's zoom him in.
Well, now joining us in the Rumble Room, the chair of the Sauk School Board, Ravi Parmar, who is just back from a Ukraine mission. Ravi, tell our community, what was it like? Was it inspiring? Was it emotional, scary? We'd just love to hear your impressions.
Yeah, thanks, Robin, John, for having me on. All of the above. So many emotions from the experience. 8 days. First of all, I want to thank my dear friend Bob Beckett, former retired Langford Fire Chief, former colleague on the Sauk School Board, who's been doing these missions to so many different destinations over the last number of years. I think this was probably his 30th mission, second one to Ukraine, and so I was so incredibly honored to be able to be a part of his multifaceted approach to being able to support people on the ground through the donation of medical supplies, fire equipment, and emergency preparedness equipment, school supplies, as well as a really cool initiative happening based here in Victoria called Victoria Hand Projects, which is providing prosthesis to those in need in Ukraine. But such an incredible, moving experience, life-changing for me. I'm someone that lives with a lot of privilege, and I got to tell you that I have very much a new outlook on life after seeing what our dear friends, Ukrainian friends, are going through.
So when you got offered this opportunity, was there any hesitation? I mean, there's a shooting war going on. There's missiles flying all over the country. It is dangerous everywhere right now in Ukraine. Did you hesitate?
Lots of hesitation, Robin. Lots of it. Never been in a circumstance like that. I have not done a lot of travel in my life, to be honest with you. And we had long talks about it. And what I'll say is I struggled with the answer because, a lot of people said to me when I told them that I was going on this, well, why couldn't you just send the aid? Why did you need to go over there? And I talked about how important it was in terms of building relationships. But it wasn't until I got there and looked a local mayor eye to eye and shook his hand and toured those schools and walked the hallways of those crowded hospitals filled with injured soldiers that I truly realized how important it was for Bob, myself, and we were so lucky to have Brendan Strain from CTV News join us as well. It wasn't until that experience that I realized how important it was for us to be there on the ground.
So you mentioned changed your life, obviously a humbling experience. Let's dig into what you saw that made such an impact. I take it there was a ton of damage and rubble around where the areas you visited, and like are a lot of places struggling to cope without electrical power, including schools. What kind of bleak physical reality is everyone facing here?
Yeah, well, John, I was expecting to see a lot of rubble, and I got to tell you, the first day that we landed there, it was pitch dark. The lights were out. Everyone was preserving power, and so when we got to our hotel at probably at midnight, it was pitch dark, and it was a bit nerve-wracking. Going into a dark room with your iPhone light on. But the next morning, when we were just kind of spending the first half of the day organizing ourselves, unloading the hockey bags, and kind of preparing ourselves for the next few days, Brennan and myself just went for a walk. We were in Lutz, the first city we were in, and we decided to just go for a walk so he could get some B-roll. And we were walking down this path, and I said to him, this looks like we're going down Government Street in Victoria, and it looks like we're home. And so for the first day or so, it didn't feel like I was in a country being ravaged by war. But it wasn't until later that afternoon when we visited a hospital. And again, never in a million years, shrapnel injuring and piercing their bodies, grenades hitting them. And again, seeing their injuries was one thing, but hearing their stories and the fact that they were talking about going back in a couple of days was just moving. And a couple of things I'd say to that. One thing is, to see the sense of pride they had in their country was one thing, but I had this profound, deep sadness to hear that they wanted to go back and they needed to go back because, there was one gentleman who I will never forget. His face will be ingrained in my mind forever. Who had lost his foot, and he jokingly said, "Put on a prosthesis. I'm ready to go back to war." And I don't know if I have the courage that he did to say what he did. And now that we're a few days later, there's a good chance that he's back on the front line. And so, seeing the impact that the war has had on soldiers, one of the most moving experiences, and I got to be careful because I don't know if I have the emotional courage to talk about it, but we went to a children's hospital, and the impact that the war has had on pregnant women and the fact that they're having their babies so premature. We were just walking down a hallway and saw young babies, being born at 500 grams on support. I don't even know if I want to go down that road. It was just so incredibly despicable to see how the lives are being treated of Ukrainians by Putin, an evil dictator. And again, I don't even know if I can use the word war to describe what he's doing. It's a genocide, and I so feel for the people of Ukraine for what they're going through. So the hospitals were just horrendous, and I just really thankful for our medical system here, but I know that those doctors and nurses are doing so much, and they were really thankful for the medical supplies we delivered. But being able to visit the hospitals was tough, but then going into the schools, which was kind of my particular focus.
I want to ask you about that. Let's just shift over for a second now. Souk district has already signed agreements with various communities. That was done during the last mission, so you're almost a follow-up. How desperate a situation is to simply hold classrooms in the middle of this environment? Are the kids getting educated in the middle of a war?
They are. Education is so critically important to them, and lots of things that I can say, Robin, with regards to education. First of all, one of the first schools we went to was rural. The lights were off because they had power outages, and we were all using our iPhone flashlights to be able to see one another. and the students weren't coming to school daily or on a regular basis because they didn't have a bomb shelter. And so, we had many students come up to me, first of all, intrigued because it was a really rural community. They don't get out, out of the rural community much into the city. And a couple of them, just adorable, said they've never seen a foreigner before, a person with dark skin. So the team and I had a bit of a chuckle over that. But their big ask was, could you help us build a bomb shelter so we could go back to school? And again, these are 6 to 10-year-olds demanding that they want to go back to school, and if we could help them, and I thought back to times where I didn't want to go to school, or I'm sure we've got lots of students who'd rather not go to school. So it's just such a real experience there. And then I had the opportunity to be able to tour schools and meet with teachers and meet with staff and tour the bomb shelters. And I asked a bit of what I thought was a naive question, was what does it constitute a bomb shelter? And it's simply an underground basement. That's it. Nothing special. And so it makes you think that if the bomb did drop on that school, those children and staff would just be buried.
So I'm quite sure we're going to be chatting with you numerous times through the year, but this is a final question from me on your trip to Ukraine. Ravi, have been following you since the early Belmont years, when you were a student advocating for a new school, and the impact that you have had not only with your friends and colleagues, but clearly adults, decision makers. So now that you're back, you're chair of the school district, clearly a powerful voice in the West Shore. What are some of the key messages that you will be telling kids on your return when you see them?
Thanks, John. Well, a couple of things. One is I learned very quickly when visiting schools and talking to teachers and educators that their philosophy of education, that while teaching science and reading and writing and math is important, their philosophy is very similar to ours in ST62, and that is our work is critical to create and foster the creation of good citizens, creating people who are going to be good stewards of not only our community, our province and country, but the entire world. That's embedded in everything they do in education system in Ukraine. And again, that's something we pride ourselves in ST62. And so I want to continue that work. Again, Bob has inspired me to want to participate in this and continue participating in this. It's so important for us to be able to support the Ukrainian people, but just as equally important is an opportunity for our students to be able to learn the challenges that they're facing, and again, create these global bonds. Again, we're just an ocean away, and one of the smaller things in nature of the trip, but was equally important for me, was the ability to deliver letters from a grade 4 or 5 class at Willway Elementary School to a school in Ukraine, Baratin Lyceum. And those students at Baratin Lyceum wrote letters as well. And I just pulled letters from the Willway pile and those from Baratin Lyceum. And they both asked questions like, do you have pets? And again, kids are so incredibly curious. They're so incredibly resilient, and they're our future leaders. And I know that as a school system and as board chair, I want to continue to do everything in my power to support fostering that creation of good citizens and global learners, because with what we went through during the pandemic and with the people that we have to deal with in this world, like Putin, we need good citizens more now than ever.
So inspiring to hear from Ravi. Somebody I have watched be a community advocate since he was in high school. This man was doing this kind of work as a teenager. Extraordinary. And of course, our prayers continue to be with the people of Ukraine. I know that sounds so, thoughts and prayers. Honestly, we're wishing the very best for these people, and we want this war to end very soon. However, let's now finish up our show with viewer mail content. Last week, we spoke to UVic climate expert Andrew Weaver, who talked about nuclear fusion being a future power solution for the world. And that's fantastic. I was so inspired by that conversation. And now he indicated also how the ozone layer is repairing itself because of world treaties signed to end the use of aerosol spray.
It's made a huge difference, John, and I think people thought that was pretty good news, but we did get some interesting mail on this, including from a friend of our show, Greg M. And
Hi, Greg M.
Hi, Greg M. He responded by saying, "Dude, you always have interesting snippets. Ozone Initiative started in 1972, so it's taken about 50 years to right-size this mess just a bit." And regarding climate change, Greg also has this to say: politicians are in the hip pocket of Exxon, Shell, BP, etc. They haven't even started the process. Poor people in China, India, and Indonesia will not starve themselves to lower climates by 2 degrees. They are poor, not stupid. And, well, Greg, I guess I have a response to that. The truth is that you're right. We have taken a long time, 50 years, to start to clean up the ozone mess, and it's going to prevent a lot of people from getting skin cancer and other things because of the danger of rays from the sun. But at least it's happening. That's a positive thing. At least it's actually happening.
Exactly.
And as for the third world burning dirty fuel now and moving to cleaner fuel in the future, I believe once cleaner fuel is really much more affordable, they will be happy to move to it. Why not? If it's affordable and they can do it cheaply, they'll move to it.
Absolutely.
And it'll be cheaper for all countries as we move out of this carbon universe. And let's cross our fingers it happens sooner than later, John. And we're getting ready to wrap this little show. But boy, we had a lot to talk about.
Well, we sure did, and we could have gone on for another hour, and especially around the comments. Some of those comments, and for all of those people who don't like my movements, of which I'm doing consistently through the show, too bad. We get almost 40,000 views a month, cumulative views, Robin, across all of our platforms. Victoria Rumble Room's audience keeps getting bigger all the time. You can find us on our sort of core social media platform, that being Facebook. We're also on Twitter, and all of our interviews, all of them, including our clips, are on our YouTube site. You can see all the addresses above me. We also have numerous groups on Facebook that interact with our discussions, don't we, Robin? As we have Instagram and, of course, TikTok. So, as always, especially after recently coming back from an overseas holiday, boy, do I love this country. So for today, I am actually going to be the Canadian sensation, John Jurisic.
And John, I stand on guard for thee. I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.